Help me, please. Somebody. An old white man was folded over against the door of his truck, one hand clawing at the handle, the other pressed flat to his chest like he was trying to hold his own ribs together. The engine was dead. The phone in his lap was dead. 40 cars had passed him in the last hour and a half, and not one of them had touched the brakes. Hold on, sir. I've got you. A man in a grease-stained work shirt was already crossing the road. My truck quit on me, the old man rasped. Gas station's 3 miles south. My legs won't carry me, son. Can you walk it with me? His hands were shaking. His left ankle was wrapped in a brace, swollen tight against the strap. Look at me. I can't make 20 feet. Then I'll go. You stay here in the shade. You don't know me. You don't owe me a thing in this world. You need gas. I've got 2 good legs. That's all this takes. He was already moving. Empty pockets, a busted shoe, 6 miles of road that shimmered like a skillet. Had no idea that one decision was about to drag every secret of his life into the daylight before the next sunrise. To understand what happened on that road, you have to back up exactly 24 hours. Because Marcus Bell woke up that Friday the same way he woke up every day, to the sound of his grandmother coughing in the next room. He lay still a minute and stared at the ceiling, at the brown water stain that had been spreading across the plaster since the spring he turned 12. The room was small. A mattress on a metal frame, a milk crate for a nightstand, one shelf with 4 paperbacks gone soft at the spines from being read too many times. He was 28 years old. By any honest measure, he should have been somewhere else by now. He'd been the kid who fixed every broken thing on the block, the one teachers said had a future, the one foreman at the plant called the smartest hand he ever hired. Life had other arithmetic. His mother left when he was 6. Packed a duffel one Sunday and walked to the bus stop and never came back. No note, no number, nothing but a name he stopped saying out loud by the time he was 10. His father had been a signature on a hospital form and not one thing more. Loretta Bell raised him on housekeeping wages and a stubbornness that could bend rebar. She cleaned 3 houses on the wealthy side of Carrollton, scrubbed their floors and pressed their shirts and roasted their Sunday chickens, then came home to a stove where only 2 of the 4 burners would light. Her back had been locked up for 9 years. Some mornings she had to grip the doorframe just to lower herself onto a chair. Marcus had told her to quit 100 times. She told him to mind his own business and pass the salt, so he worked instead. He worked 2 jobs. Mornings he ran the dish line at a diner off the county road from 6 until 2, came home smelling of fryer grease and bleach, then spent his afternoons cutting lawns and patching fences and hauling anything anybody needed hauled until the light went orange and died. Every dollar he made had a name already written on it. Loretta's prescriptions, the power bill, the property tax that circled their little house every year like something patient and hungry. He never complained, not once. Not when the dish soap cracked his knuckles open and his blood ran pink into the rinse water. Not when the old riding mower threw a belt in July and he push-mowed 2 acres in 90-degree heat, finishing in the dark with his arms covered in welts. Not when men he'd gone to school, with posted photos from their lake houses and their promotions, and he scrolled past them on a cracked phone screen during his 15-minute lunch, then put the phone in his pocket and went back to the pots. Loretta noticed. Loretta noticed everything. "You carry too much for a man your age," she told him once, standing in the kitchen doorway with her coffee going cold in her good hands. "I'm fine, Grandma." "That's not what I said, and you know it." She had a saying she'd worn smooth from use. She said it when he carried groceries up the steps for Miss Ada next door. She said it when he reset Mr. Pruitt's porch rail without being asked. She said it the day he walked a Lost Beagle 11 blocks home in a rainstorm and showed up soaked to the bone with a dog under his arm and a grin on his face. "You help people not because they'll pay you back," she'd say. "You help because that's who you are." He'd heard it so many times it stopped sounding like advice and started sounding like his own pulse. That Friday afternoon, Loretta pressed $12 into his palm and asked him to walk down to Callaway's pharmacy, 2 miles out on the state road. Her arthritis medicine was ready. The county bus didn't run on weekends, and the car, a 2004 Mercury with a fractured windshield and a battery that had given up in March, had been sitting dead in the gravel drive for months. "Get the pills," she said. "Come straight home." And drink water. It's a furnace out there. He laced up his sneakers, the same pair he'd been gluing back together since the winter, and stepped out the front door. The heat hit him like the open mouth of an oven. He didn't know it yet, but he was not coming straight home. The walk to Callaway's took 40 minutes on a forgiving day, and this was not a forgiving day. The thermometer bolted to the front of the hardware store on Route 19 read 97 degrees, and he saw it as he passed. 97 at 10 minutes to 2, the air so thick with Georgia humidity that breathing felt like drinking. Heat came up off the blacktop in slow waves that bent the world at the edges. He kept his head down and kept his feet moving. The shoulder of the road was red clay and dead grass, no sidewalk for the last mile, and cars passed him every couple of minutes, some fast, some crawling, and not a single one slowed to ask if he wanted out of the sun. He didn't expect them to. A black man walking the shoulder of a county road in rural Georgia was just part of the scenery, and he'd been part of it his whole life. Callaway's was a narrow brick storefront wedged between a shuttered feed store and a laundromat with a hand-lettered sign. The pharmacist, a soft-spoken man named Dell, knew him by name. "Loretta's refill," Marcus said. "Got it right here." Dell slid the white bag across. $8.40. Marcus counted the bills out careful and slow, took his change, $3.60, and folded it into his front pocket with the receipt. "How's she getting on?" Dell asked. "She's good. Same as always." It was the answer he gave everybody, and it was never the truth. The arthritis was winning. Some mornings her fingers curled so tight, she couldn't work the cap off the bottle herself, so Marcus did it for her before his shift, thumbed 2 tablets out and set them beside a glass of water on her nightstand. And she never once asked him to. He just did it. The same way he caulked the kitchen window every November and hand-washed her compression stockings in the sink because the machine had been broken since who knew when. He stepped back out into the heat, and it took him again, that wall of wet fire, and the sun had not moved, and the air had not cooled, and the plastic bag stuck to the sweat on his wrist. He wished he'd bought 2 bottles of water instead of 1. One was all he could justify when every dollar already had a name. He was a mile from home, maybe a little more, when he saw the truck. An old half-ton pickup, faded blue, pulled crooked onto the shoulder with the hood up and steam long gone. The driver's door hung open, and a man sat sideways in the seat with both boots in the gravel and his head tipped back against the frame. A brace on his left ankle, the strap cinched over a swollen joint, white hair plastered to his scalp with sweat, khaki pants, a wrinkled checked shirt soaked through to a darker color at the chest and back. 75, maybe older. His chest moved in shallow little pulls that didn't look like enough. Marcus slowed. In the next half a minute, he watched 3 vehicles go by, a red dually, a minivan, a silver SUV with a whole family inside, and not one of them so much as touched the brake. The old man didn't wave them down. He didn't call out. He just sat there, still as a fence post, like a man who had already finished hoping anybody would stop. Marcus looked at the pharmacy bag in his hand. He looked at the $3.60 in his pocket. He looked down the road at the mile still standing between him and the porch where Loretta was waiting on her medicine. Then he looked at the old man, and his feet turned off the path on their own. "Sir, you all right?" The old man's eyes opened, pale blue, clouded, slow to find him, the way people look at something they're not sure is real, I think. He swallowed hard, and his lips were white at the corners, ran dry. "Been sitting here, I don't know, hour and a half." Marcus set the bag down on the gravel and stepped in close. The heat coming off the truck's hood was like standing too near a grill. The man's hands trembled in his lap, and it wasn't cold doing it. It was a body running low on everything it had. "You got a phone?" Marcus asked. "Dead." He patted his shirt pocket and gave a thin laugh that turned into a dry, scraping cough. "Left the cord at the motel. Figured a lot of things short drive. Figured a lot of things wrong today." Marcus looked both directions. Nothing but heat and silence and a flat ribbon of 2-lane Georgia blacktop running out until it got tired. "Nearest station's about 3 miles that way," he said and pointed south. "I know it." The man nodded slow. "I know exactly how far it is." There was something in the way he said it. Not anger, not even frustration. Just a man who had already done the math and come up short on every line. 3 miles was nothing in a working truck. 3 miles was the whole world on a bad ankle with the sun sitting on your shoulders like a sack of wet sand. Marcus looked at the deep red flush climbing the man's neck past sunburn into something that was starting to scare him, watched the breath come too fast and too shallow. He'd seen the cook at the diner go down like this one July, dropped behind the grill line in the middle of a lunch rush, and it had started exactly this way. "Here," Marcus said. He reached into the bag and pulled out the one bottle of water he'd bought for himself. The only one. He cracked the cap and held it out. Small sips. Slow. The man hesitated. "That's yours, son. You need it worse than I do right now." He took it. His hands shook so hard. The water ran down his chin and darkened his collar, and he drank half of it in 3 long pulls before Marcus could tell him again to slow down. "Thank you," he said, and his voice was already steadier. "What do they call you?" "Marcus. Marcus Bell. Arthur." The old man put out a trembling hand. Marcus took it. The grip was weak but deliberate, the ghost of a handshake that used to crush. "Been watching cars go by, Marcus. 40-50 of them. Nobody stops for an old man on the side of the road anymore." Marcus didn't have anything to say to that. He didn't need to. 3 miles south, he said again, more to himself than to Arthur. "That's 6 miles on your own 2 feet, son. There and back. In this. You don't have to do this. I know, I don't have to." He picked up the pharmacy bag, set it careful on the passenger seat where it would stay out of the sun, and took one long look down the road ahead. "Stay in the shade," he said. "Keep sipping. I'll be back." Then he started walking. The first mile was just heat. Marcus walked the shoulder as far from the lane as the clay would let him. Red dust caked his sneakers inside 100 yards, and the glue on the left sole had gone soft in the sun, so the shoe peeled away from itself with a faint wet sound only he could hear. No shade. Not a single tree from one horizon to the other. Just open fields gone brown and a sky so white and bright it hurt to lift his eyes to it. The air tasted like hot metal and dry grass. He had no water now, he'd given it away. By the half-mile mark his mouth was dry, and by a full mile his tongue felt thick and slow, and his shirt was soaked clean through, front and back, the sweat running into his eyes and stinging until he wiped it on his forearm and kept on. A car went by heading south, then another. Neither slowed. He thought about putting a thumb out the way they did in old movies, and then he thought better of it. Because a black man hitchhiking alone on a back road in Georgia didn't end with a free ride. It ended with a call to the county sheriff, so he walked. The second mile was pain. It started in his feet, a hot, low throb in the right heel where the sole had worn through to skin. Then it climbed into his calves and set up in his knees. His body wasn't tired so much as angry. It was telling him to sit down in the ditch, find a culvert, wait out the worst of the afternoon. He didn't sit. He thought about his grandmother, who walked into 3 strangers' houses every weekday and cleaned them top to bottom on a back that hadn't worked right in nearly a decade, who never stopped, not when her knees swelled to the size of softballs, not when her hands locked up so bad. She cried about it quietly in the bathroom where she thought he couldn't hear. If Loretta Bell could scrub kitchen tile on ruined joints and never say a word, he could walk 3 miles in the sun. The station showed up at the bottom of a long, slow grade. A little independent stop, 2 pumps under a metal canopy that ticked and pinged in the heat. Marcus pushed through the glass door and stood in the air conditioning for exactly 3 seconds. He wanted to stand there for 3 hours. He gave himself 3, and then he moved. The man behind the counter was middle-aged and sunburned, in a faded polo with a name tag that said Reggie. He looked Marcus over, sweat-soaked, dust-caked, alone, and his mouth tightened. "Help you? I need a gallon of gas in a can." Reggie didn't move. "Where's your vehicle?" "It's not mine. There's a man stranded about 3 miles north. His truck ran dry. And he sent you walking out in this?" "He didn't send me. I came." Reggie held the look a beat longer, then shrugged toward the back wall. Marcus found the red plastic cans on a low shelf, 1 gallon, $4.79 on the sticker. He carried it to the counter and laid his money down, $3.60. He was $1.19 short. He stared at the bills and coins on the counter and his throat went tight. He'd walked 2 miles in killing heat for this exact moment. He'd given away the only water he had. He'd left an old man on the side of the road with a promise in his mouth, and here he stood, $1.19 short, and Reggie was already starting to shake his head. Look, man, I can't just... There's somebody out there who might not make it if I don't bring this back. Marcus's voice didn't crack. It came out low and level and dead serious. Please. Something shifted in Reggie's face. He looked at Marcus, really looked, at the dust ground into the cracked shoe, at the sweat-dried white in rings on the work shirt, at the pharmacy receipt poking out of his pocket like a receipt for the whole shape of his life. He reached under the counter, pulled $1.25 out of a coffee can by the register, and pushed it across. Go on, he said. Marcus paid, filled the can at the pump, and started north. A full gallon of gas weighs a little over 8 pounds. By the second mile back, it felt like 40. He switched it hand to hand every 100 steps, and the wire handle bit into his palms and raised red welts that would last for days, and he kept walking. His vision swam twice. Both times he stopped, shut his eyes, counted to 5, and started again. The road ran out ahead of him like a strip of fire, shimmering, endless. He thought about turning around exactly once. The thought lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then he saw Arthur's face, the pale blue eyes, the cracked lips, the way he'd said nobody stops anymore, and Marcus kept walking because he'd said he would come back, and Marcus Bell did not break a promise. He saw the blue truck from a quarter mile out, hood still up, Arthur still in the seat, but sitting up straighter now. The water had done its work. Marcus came down the shoulder with the can in his right hand, his arm aching from the elbow down, his shirt clinging to his ribs like skin, dust on every inch of him. Arthur saw him coming and got up slow, one hand on the door for balance, and when Marcus got close enough to read his face, the old man's eyes were wet. You came back, Arthur said. I said I would. Marcus unscrewed the cap and poured the gallon in careful, tilting the can so it wouldn't slosh. The way you do when you've watched a man soak his pant leg in gasoline once and learned from it. Arthur climbed in and turned the key. The engine coughed, caught, and held, a low, steady rumble, and the old man let out a breath like he'd been holding it since the spring. Son. He pulled a worn leather wallet from his back pocket, thumbed it open, and held out a $100 bill. Take this. Please? Marcus looked at it. $100 was a week and a half on the dish line. It was a month of cutting lawns. It was Loretta's prescriptions clear through the fall. He shook his head. I didn't do it for money, sir. I know you didn't. That's exactly why I want you to have it. My grandmother says you don't help people because they'll pay you back. You help because it's the right thing to do. Arthur went still with the bill held out between them like a bridge. Neither one of them was going to cross. After a long moment, he folded it back into the wallet. Your grandmother, he said quietly. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She is. What's her name? Loretta. Loretta Bell. Arthur opened the glove box and took out a small leather notebook and a pen. Marcus watched him write, slow and deliberate, the way a man writes down something he means to keep. Marcus Bell, Arthur read back, and you live where? Marcus hesitated. His grandmother had taught him never to hand his address to a stranger. But there was something in the way the old man had said remarkable, like he meant it in a way most people don't mean anything. Off Pine Hollow Road, Marcus said. The White House at the dead end, the one with the green shutters. Arthur nodded and closed the notebook. He put his hand out again, and this time the grip was firmer, steadier. Thank you, Marcus. You drive safe now. Arthur pulled the door shut and rolled the window down. He looked at Marcus one more time, a long, quiet look that Marcus would not understand until the next morning. You walk safe getting home, he said. Then he drove away. Marcus watched the blue truck shrink and disappear around the bend. He picked up the empty can and started the last mile home. The sun was lower now, and his shadow stretched out long in front of him, reaching the porch before he did. He got home at 6:45. The sky had gone purple at the edges, and the first fireflies were blinking in the tall grass beside the steps. Loretta was at the stove. Rice and butter beans, the Friday meal, because it was cheap and it stretched. He could smell it from the porch, and that smell, the bay leaf and the pepper and the sweet steam of rice, was the smell of his entire childhood. You're late, she said without turning around. She was stirring with a wooden spoon, her left hand pressed flat to her lower back. I know, I'm sorry. He set the pharmacy bag on the counter. She glanced at it, then at him, and took in the dust and the sweat and the red welts striped across both palms. What happened to you? Man broke down on the road, ran out of gas. I walked down to the station and brought him back a can. Loretta stopped stirring. She turned and looked at him the way she looked at things that mattered. How far? About 3 miles each way. In this heat? Yes, ma'am. She didn't say anything for a while. She just looked at her grandson, 28 years old, standing in her kitchen caked in red dust with his hands torn up from carrying a gas can 6 miles for a man he'd never met. How much did the gas run? Marcus paused. Can was $4.79. I came up short. Fella behind the counter covered the rest. She looked at the pharmacy receipt on the counter and did the arithmetic in her head, the $12 she'd given him, the $8.40 for the pills, the rest of it gone to gas for a stranger. He'd walked in the door with nothing. She didn't scold him, she didn't lecture. She set the spoon down, crossed the kitchen, and took his face in both of her stiff, warm hands the way she'd held it when he was a boy scared of thunder. "Your granddaddy," she said, "would have done the exact same thing." They ate at the small table by the window, rice and butter beans, and Marcus had 2 plates. Loretta watched him eat and said nothing more about the man on the road. Some things don't need more words said over them. He washed up, took a shower in cold water because the heater was acting up again, and stood under it watching red Georgia dust swirl down the drain between his feet. His palms stung where the wire had cut in. His right heel throbbed where the shoe had worn through. He lay down on the mattress and was asleep in 4 minutes. He had no idea what was coming up the road in the morning. The car turned onto Pine Hollow Road at 8 minutes past 7 on a Saturday, and it came slow. It came in off the county highway where the pavement was smooth, and by the time it reached the middle stretch where the asphalt turned to patched gravel and the fence posts leaned, it had already pulled every eye on the road. A black town car, long and gleaming, the kind nobody out here had ever seen anywhere but on a television. Miss Ada was out front in her housecoat dragging a hose toward her tomatoes, and she stopped mid-step with her mouth half open and the water pooling around her slippers. Mr. Pruitt set his coffee down on his porch rail and did not pick it back up for 20 minutes. 2 men changing a tire across the way straightened up and just watched it roll past like a thing that had taken a very wrong turn. Nobody on Pine Hollow had ever seen a car like that in the flesh. Not here, on a road where the streetlight had been dark for 2 years and the nearest grocery was a 40-minute walk. A car like that on Pine Hollow Road was a whale in a wading pool. It did not make sense. It did not belong, and yet there it was, black and shining, moving slow, and certain like it was hunting for one specific thing. It stopped in front of the White House with the green shutters. Loretta was already up. She'd heard the engine too smooth and too quiet for anything that belonged on the road, and she'd looked out the front window. A driver stepped out, dark suit, white shirt, black tie, checked a folded paper in his hand, and started up the 3 wooden steps. Her heart dropped clean into her stomach. She opened the door before he could knock. Her eyes went from the driver to the long black car to the neighbors frozen in their yards. "Ma'am," the driver said, "I'm looking for Marcus Bell." "Why?" The word came out sharp, the voice of a woman who had raised a black man in a world that did not always handle black men gently. "What's he done?" "Nothing wrong, ma'am." The driver produced a heavy cream-colored envelope, a name embossed in gold across the seal. "Mr. Arthur Hale would like to invite your grandson to his home this morning. He asked me to deliver this to you personally." Loretta took the envelope. Her hands were trembling. She turned it over. The name on the back meant nothing to her, but the weight of the paper and the gold letters and the long car idling at her gravel meant the same thing all at once. This was not a man who asked for things lightly. She opened it and pulled out a single sheet, handwritten blue ink on cream. She read the first 3 lines and her breath stopped in her chest. "Dear Mrs. Bell," it began. "Yesterday afternoon your grandson walked 6 miles in the heat to help a stranger. He had no reason on this earth to help. He gave me his only water. He refused my money. I have not stopped thinking about him since." She read it twice. Then she sat down slow in the porch chair because her legs would not hold her up anymore. "Grandma?" Marcus came into the hall, rubbing his eyes. "What's going on? Whose car is that?" Loretta looked up at him. Her eyes were wet, but she was smiling, the kind of smile that breaks and builds in the same motion. "Get dressed," she said. "Put on your good shirt." "My good shirt? Why? Where are we going?" She held out the letter. "That man you helped yesterday," she said quietly. "He sent a car for you." Marcus took it and read it standing there in the hall in his undershirt and bare feet, the morning light coming through the window behind him. By the time he reached the bottom, his hands were shaking the same way hers had. Outside, the whole road was still watching. Nobody had moved. Nobody had gone back inside. Something was happening on Pine Hollow that had never happened there before, and every soul on that road could feel it the way you feel a storm coming before you ever see the cloud. The car turned off the highway after 25 minutes onto a private drive lined with live oaks, so old their branches met overhead and made a tunnel. Spanish moss hung off every limb and swayed in a breeze that didn't seem to exist anywhere else in Georgia that day. Marcus sat in the back with his hands flat on his knees in his good white shirt, the one Loretta had pressed the night before for church. She sat beside him in her Sunday dress with the cream envelope tucked in her purse and her eyes fixed straight ahead. Neither of them had said much since they got in. The house came up through the trees like something out of another century. White columns, a wraparound porch, a lawn so green it looked painted on. 3 vehicles stood in the circle drive, a silver sedan, a dark SUV, and the faded blue pickup. Marcus knew that truck the second he saw it. Same cracked tail light, same dent in the bed. The driver opened their door. Marcus stepped out first and put his hand back for his grandmother, and she took it, and her grip was tight enough to hurt. Arthur Hale was waiting at the front door, and he looked like a different man than the one Marcus had found dying on the shoulder. Yesterday he'd been sunburned, shaking, half-folded against a truck. Today he stood straight, clean-shaven, in a light linen blazer and polished shoes, and his eyes, the same pale blue, were clear and sharp and entirely in command. He looked like a man who owned a great many things. "Marcus," he said, and put out his hand. The grip was strong this time. "Thank you for coming." "Yes, sir." Arthur turned to Loretta and took her hand in both of his. "Mrs. Bell, I owe you a conversation." He led them into a sitting room with tall windows and shelves of leather-bound books. A woman in a gray dress brought sweet tea on a silver tray. Marcus took a glass and held it without drinking. Arthur sat across from them, quiet a moment, studying Marcus with a patience that had something certain underneath it. "I need to tell you who I am," Arthur said, "and then I need to tell you what I do." He reached to the side table and picked up a framed magazine cover, a business journal, 11 years old. The photo showed a younger Arthur standing in front of a glass tower with his name cut into the limestone above the doors. "My name is Arthur Hale. I built Hale Logistics out of one second-hand truck 40 years ago. Today it moves freight through 9 states, employs a little over 11,000 people, and last year it cleared $1.5 billion in revenue." Loretta's hand found Marcus's knee under the table and pressed down hard enough that he felt her rings against his skin. Marcus didn't move. He looked at the magazine cover and tried to fit the man in the photograph to the man who'd been slumped against a truck door on a back road with his lips going white. "But that's not the part I drove out here to talk about," Arthur said. He set the frame down. "About a year before I founded that company, I was 26 years old and broke, and my car died on a road in Alabama in the dark, and a man I had never met, a man who had every reason to keep driving, stopped and gave me a ride 40 miles and $20 he plainly could not spare. I tried to find him for years to pay him back. I never did. He passed before I had the means, so I made a different arrangement with myself." He leaned forward and his voice came down low. "A few times a year I drive out into the parts of this country most people with money never see. The back roads, the small towns. I drive that old truck. I wear plain clothes, and I let it run out of gas, and I sit, and I wait to see who stops. I've done it more times than I can count, going on 15 years now." "Do you know how many people have stopped, Marcus?" Marcus shook his head. 11, Arthur said, and let the number sit, in 15 years. "A few called a tow truck through their window and drove on. 2 handed me a bottle of water. 1 offered me money to make himself feel better and left before I could say no. But in all those years, on all those roads, you are the only soul who walked 6 miles in killing heat, spent money you did not have to spend, gave away your own water, and then looked me in the eye and refused a single dollar for it." Loretta was crying without a sound, the tears running down and falling onto the collar of her Sunday dress, and she didn't wipe them away. She just held her grandson's knee and let them come. Arthur stood and crossed to a desk by the window and picked up a Navy folder. "Don't do this the easy way," he said. "I could have mailed you a check. A check would insult what you did. So here is what I'd like to offer instead." He opened the folder. Marcus's name was already printed across the top of the documents inside. Marcus Bell. "A position," Arthur said. "Not a handout, a position with my company in our regional operations office right here in Georgia, starting in our management training program. The men who run that program port straight to me, and I have already told them your name. The starting salary is $58,000 a year. There is full health coverage from the first day, which I suspect your grandmother could use. And the company will pay for any schooling you want to pursue while you work, in full, whatever the field, no conditions on it." Marcus's throat closed. He pressed his lips together and breathed through his nose. He would not cry in this room. He would not cry in front of this man. He would... Loretta broke first. A sound came out of her that wasn't a sob and wasn't a word but something in between, and she pressed both hands over her mouth and her shoulders shook. Marcus put his arm around her, and that was when he lost it too. Just tears running quiet down his face while he held his grandmother in a rich man's sitting room and tried to understand how a 6-mile walk had carried him here. Arthur wasn't finished. "There's one more thing," he said, and waited until they looked up. "Yesterday, when you gave me your address, I had my office pull the county records on the way home. There's a community center on the corner of Pine Hollow and Route 19. It closed 4 years ago when the county cut the funding. Marcus knew the building. Everybody on Pine Hollow knew it. It used to have a gymnasium and an after-school program and a little library in the back room, and now it was a concrete shell with plywood over the windows and weeds coming up through the cracks in the lot. My company is going to rebuild it," Arthur said. "Fully funded. A new building, a gym, a tutoring center, a computer lab, and a kitchen that serves hot meals. Ground breaks in the fall." Loretta made that sound. "Again. It will not carry my name," Arthur said, and he looked at her. "It will carry hers. The Loretta Bell Community Center. Because a road that raises a man like your grandson deserves to be remembered for what it got right." Mrs. Bell tried 3 times to speak before the words came. "You don't have to do that," she whispered. "Mrs. Bell," Arthur said, and his voice was gentle, but it did not bend. "Your grandson walked 6 miles for a stranger, gave away his water and his money, and asked for nothing. He learned that from somebody. Somebody is you. This is the very least I can do." Marcus looked at his grandmother, the woman who had raised him on $12 afternoons and butter beans, who had cleaned 3 houses a day on a back that screamed every time she bent down, who had taught him without ever once making a speech of it that kindness was not a transaction. He looked at the folder with his name on it. He looked at Arthur Hale, the man he'd found dying on the side of a road, sitting across from him now in pressed linen, offering to turn the whole world over. "I didn't help you for this," Marcus said, and his voice came out thick and raw. "You know that, right?" Arthur smiled, the first real smile Marcus had seen on him. "That," he said, "is exactly why you're getting it." The car took them home an hour later. The same long black car, the same road. Marcus sat in the back with the Navy folder on his lap and his grandmother's head on his shoulder. She'd fallen asleep somewhere around the highway, worn clean out by the morning. When the car turned onto Pine Hollow, every neighbor was still outside, every one of them standing in their yards and sitting on their porches waiting. Marcus stepped out into a sun that was high and warm now, the same sun that had tried to break him the day before. He walked up the 3 steps and opened the door of the white house with the green shutters and stood in the hallway. Same cracked floor, same water stain on the ceiling, nothing in it the same anymore. 3 years later, Marcus Bell stood in a conference room in the Hale Logistics regional office and shook hands with a man twice his age who now reported to him. He'd finished a business degree at night, paid in full, the way Arthur had promised. He ran the Georgia operations desk. He was the first person in his family to hold a salaried job with his own name on the office door, and the men under him would tell you he was the hardest and the fairest boss they'd ever worked for, because Marcus Bell remembered exactly what it was to be a man walking the shoulder of a road that nobody slowed down for. The acceptance into a life he'd stopped letting himself want sat framed on Loretta's wall now, where the unpaid bills used to be magneted to the fridge. A photo, Marcus at his graduation, smiling so wide it looked like his face couldn't hold it. She showed it to everyone who set foot in her kitchen before she showed them anything else. Marcus stayed on Pine Hollow Road. People asked him why, with the degree, with the title. He could have moved to Atlanta, to Charlotte, anywhere. He stayed because the heater still acted up in the winter and his grandmother still lived there, and because a man doesn't leave the road that raised him just because he finally got the means to. Arthur Hale was 78 now and slower than he'd been, but his eyes still went bright every time Marcus called. They spoke most Sundays. Arthur always asked the same thing, the same question, and laughed every time. "You stopped for anybody on the road lately?" The Loretta Bell Community Center opened on a Saturday in October, 14 months after the ground broke. Marcus cut the ribbon. Loretta stood beside him, leaning on a cane she swore up and down she didn't need, wearing the same Sunday dress she'd worn to Arthur's house the morning everything turned. The building had a gymnasium and a tutoring lab with a dozen computers and a kitchen that fed anybody who showed up hungry 3 nights a week, and a small library in the back with a sign hand-painted over the door. Marcus had painted it himself. It read, "You help because that's who you are." Some evenings, after the place emptied out, Marcus would stand alone in that little library and look up at his grandmother's words in his own handwriting on a wall built by a man who ran out of gas on purpose. And he'd think about a blue truck and 3 miles of road on fire, and $1.19 he didn't have, and a stranger behind a register who covered it anyway. About how the smallest decision on the worst day can swing open a door you never knew was there. He never had to tell anybody the story. The building told it for him. So before you scroll on, ask yourself the only question that ever really matters out there on the road. When you see somebody stranded, somebody the whole world is driving past, are you going to keep your eyes on the windshield? Or are you going to stop? If this one moved you, stay a second longer. Leave a word below about the last time a stranger stopped for you. And follow along, because there are more of these true-to-life stories coming, and every one of them is really just one question asked a different way. Who are you when nobody's watching and nothing's offered in return? Marcus Bell answered it with his own 2 legs on the hottest road in Georgia. Now it's your turn.